Thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Shortly after starting the game, you can speak with this woman who will give you a bell charm, which can send you back in time to the Harada estate, to eventually fight Lady Butterfly. Just before her fight, you come across this man, Inosuke Nogami, the son of the woman that gave you the charm. He warns you of Lady Butterfly's dreadful illusion techniques. Looking closely at his face, it seems he's bleeding from his eyes with what appears to be a fresh wound, implying he was just blinded during his fight with her. We can find him 3 years later in the Ashina outskirts, just outside of his mother's house, on the verge of death, with bandages wrapped around his eyes. Anyway, walking forward a bit into Lady Butterfly's arena will, obviously, start her fight, and this cutscene that plays before it. Inside of this cutscene, looking closely at Kuro here, will reveal that he actually has the charm the woman gave us tucked into his waistband. After Lady Butterfly's fight, we obtain the Sakura droplet, an item that can be given to Kuro for an extra resurrection. However, we can give this to the Divine Child of Rejuvenation as well, for a little bit of unique dialogue. Lady Butterfly is, of course, optional, and most players will tend to have Gyobu as the first major fight of the game. As you start his encounter, he'll calmly introduce himself.
My name is Gyobu Masataka Oniwa!
Interrupting him during this introduction will give you a bit of unique dialogue. After fighting Gyobu, one of your next big fights is the Blazing Bull, and just after fighting it, you can obtain the Gatehouse Key by killing these enemies. If you return to the Ashina Reservoir from the start of the game, you can use the key to obtain Gyobu's Broken Horn. This item unlocks the loaded spear prosthetic, and I always found the spear a little strange. Its description reads, the horn contracts to pull enemies in, also capable of stripping crude armor. Despite being specifically mentioned in its description, there's only 2 enemies I know of that can actually have their armor removed. The first enemy is directly mentioned in the eavesdrop before obtaining the key. They're referring to this guy, the Bell variant of Taro's troop, and when you know it, we can pull his armor off. The other enemy, whose armor is removable, is quite a bit later in the game. This drunkard, found in the Ashina outskirts after the castle's been invaded for the second time. This guy takes 2 hits of the spear to fully pull his armor off, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here. Just before our first rematch with Genichiro, Wolf learns how to redirect lightning through his body and dispel it to attack enemies. Usually, this is done by just hitting the jump button and then attacking. However, the Nitro Slash skill launches you into the air briefly, and during this time, you can actually absorb lightning. This is completely useless though, because there's no way to expel it during the animation, so you'll just get electrocuted like a dumbass when you land. Since the skill launches you into the air, you can also use it to jump over sweep attacks, interestingly enough, but this is probably decently well known. After entering the Senpo Temple, you'll come across a bunch of crickets. They're normally completely passive. However, if this guy spits on you, you'll get affected by a debuff, which causes the crickets to aggro to you. Deflecting their attacks will instantly kill them, for whatever reason. As far as I know, this is the only time simply deflecting an enemy will kill it. Here in the temple, you can also find one of my favorite characters in the game, Kotaro, a friendly giant monk. You may choose to give him the red and white pinwheel, found shortly before the armored warrior fight, or the white pinwheel, found below the cliff where you found the red and white one. Giving him the white one will cause him to ask you to spirit him away. Using the Divine Abduction prosthetic tool on him will transport him to the Halls of Illusion, where he will give you a Taro Persimmon, This is a unique item, and you can give it to the Divine Child of Rejuvenation for some unique dialogue where she comments how good it is.
素晴らしく思うございます。
If you give her a normal persimmon, she's a little less enthusiastic.
甘くて美味しいです。
Something that's a little more interesting than that, though, is what you can hear if you listen closely to Wolf consuming a persimmon. This will happen with the Taro persimmon as well as the normal one. After you give a persimmon to the Divine Child of Rejuvenation, you'll receive a bag of rice from her to give to Kuro. If you give him this rice, he'll tell you to come back in a bit. Next time you see him, he'll have a rice ball to give you, and eating it in front of him will give you some rare dialogue.
そうであろう、そうであろう。
Incredible. Also, I want to mention that you can use Divine Abduction on Kotaro before ever even interacting with him. This still sends him to the Halls of Illusion, though he'll be quite confused. Continuing through the temple, we'll eventually come across this guy, Long-Armed Centipede Sen-Un. Before starting his fight, peeking at him from above will reveal that he actually sharpens his claws while waiting for a challenger. On top of that, he sharpens them in the same rhythm he attacks. Speaking of long-armed centipedes, this guy always stood out to me as a little strange. The other long-armed centipede just has what is presumably their name after the, long-armed centipede part. So what, his name is just Giraffe? Well, actually, there's a pretty reasonable explanation for this. In the Japanese version of the game, his name is written in katakana, something that is typically used for foreign loanwords. It is written exactly as the English word giraffe. However, it could also be interpreted as
ジラフ。
an archaic Japanese name. This, to me, makes a lot more sense than this guy being called a giraffe. I mean, just look at his neck, man. It's normal. Also, this isn't the only time katakana is used for a character's name. Some of you may have thought it a little strange that this character's name is Emma, something that's traditionally a foreign name, while her character is native to Japan. Well, this is possibly because her name in Japanese,
Emma,
is a traditionally Japanese name. However, again, it was written in katakana in the Japanese version of the game. The translators may have taken this to mean that she is foreign and thus translated her name as Emma. My favorite bit of translation trivia, though, comes at the end of the Senpo Temple with the folding screen monkeys. Their name in the Japanese version of the game actually contains a subtle hint to the fight. It reads,
見る猿、聞く猿、言う猿。
meaning seeing monkey, hearing monkey, speaking monkey. But there's actually an extra comma in their name, indicating the fourth invisible monkey who follows Wolf around the arena. What the? What is that? Wait. No way! An M10 Booker from the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, War Thunder, available now for PC, consoles, and mobile? I don't believe it. Boom! Come on, folks, you already know what time it is. War Thunder, baby, come on! They've got literally thousands of different vehicles to choose from, ranging from the biplanes and armored cars of the 1920s to the fighter jets and M10 Bookers of today. And you already know their vehicles are so meticulously detailed and their graphics and sound effects so realistic that you can't help but immerse yourself into the combat. Uh-oh, and now you're telling me there's a community of over 95 million players that you can join right now, today, on PC, consoles, and mobile for free? And I can choose if I want to play fast-paced matches with arcade mode, attempt the ultimate challenge with simulator mode, or choose a nice middle ground with realistic mode? What, next you're going to tell me there's a link in the description and pinned comment to receive a massive bonus pack, including multiple premium vehicles and the exclusive vehicle decorator Eagle of Valor, available for new and returning players that haven't played for at least 6 months on PC and consoles, or something ridiculous like that. What? There is? What's that? And you'd get 100,000 silver lions and 7 days of premium account? Wow, what a great deal. Let me tell you folks, it doesn't get any better than this if you're a fan of military history. but the bonus pack is only available for a limited time. So act quickly and sign up today using one of my links to receive everything in the bonus pack and experience all the game has to offer. Backtracking a bit from the monkeys to near the start of the temple, we can use the puppeteer ninjutsu to control this rat. We'll send this kite up. You can use this kite to grapple across to the sunken valley. And eventually, you'll come across this wooden plank placed above the giant serpent that chased you near the start of the game on your way through the Underbridge Valley. You can get a death blow if you jump off, however, if you ignore the second death blow that appears, this'll happen. You emerge at the entrance of the other serpent's cave, a little before the guardian apes fight. In this cave, you obviously come across the second serpent, but there's actually a third, hidden serpent within this cave. This body wrapped around a rock is a separate snake with its own head. You can see it briefly while falling to your death, but it's possible to get a much clearer view using a free cam. You can verify this isn't the initial serpent that we encounter, because there's no damage to its left eye and, well, it doesn't disappear after we kill the first one. If we hit him, he'll wriggle around and the geysers here will erupt with poison. Strangely, entering the cave with a stealth cheat active will cause the serpent that attacks you at the end of the cave to never appear, though the hidden serpent appears like normal and is actually able to be attacked with a death blow. Well, kinda. Finally, the snake that helped us fast travel is visible from the Guardian Apes arena if we simply look left. While we're here with the Guardian Ape, there's a pretty niche interaction in the fight that we can see while using the loaded spear. After parrying his big charged overhead slam, using the loaded spear will actually pull the centipede out of his neck briefly and do massive posture damage. Also, in both the Guardian Ape's second phase as well as the Headless Apes fight, they'll often wind up and do a big AoE terror screen. First off, this attack isn't really centered on the ape, it more like projects out in front of him. So running a little behind him will just negate it completely. Next, there's an even more niche interaction found here with Divine Confetti. Attacking the AoE with it on your weapon will cause this to happen. Each time the effect flashes, you'll actually negate one tick of the attack's damage and its terror buildup. Using something like the Spiral Cloud Passage combat art with this, we can basically tank the entire screen. And if we deal enough damage, often stagger him out of the attack. The Lazulite Sacred Flame also works for this. This is another really common piece of trivia, but after depleting the Headless Ape's health, you can simply ignore the extra death blow after killing him, and he'll just writhe occasionally on the ground. He'll stay like this forever, as far as I know, and you can approach him to sever his immortality at any time. We can also ignore the brown-haired ape and only kill the headless one, for a special animation where she'll simply just disappear. This appears to be because she's actually already dead, and we were just fighting an apparition of her. A little before their arena, we can head up here to where she jumped down from, and it will reveal what are presumably her remains. Or you could choose to skip the Headless Ape fight entirely. You may remember these apparitions that can be found around Ashina after a certain point in the game. They'll spawn after killing 2 out of 3 of the following bosses: the Guardian Ape, the Corrupted Monk Apparition, and the Folding Screen Monkeys. However, it turns out that they can appear in multiple places depending on the order of the bosses killed. For example, if you chose to kill the Corrupted Monk to obtain the Shelter Stone, and then the monkeys before killing the Guardian Ape for the Lotus of the Flower, some apparitions will spawn in the Undershrine Valley, a little before entering the Gun Fort. If you get the Lotus first though, they'll appear a little before Mibu Village. There's actually a neat little NPC interaction we can see here in Mibu Village that I want to show off. Here, we come across Orin of the Water, a mini-boss who solemnly plays a shamisen. If we make our way back to the Ashina Reservoir, we can encounter a character named Jinzaemon Kumano, a man who's become captivated with this melody, standing above where we started the game. Normally, his quest involves him telling you that he wants to follow the music and find its source. It culminates in him finding Orin and this happening. He just kinda dies and drops a Jizo statue. However, if you kill Orin before ever meeting him, interacting with him will cause this to happen. What a prick. Also, killing him here will not result in you getting a Jizo statue. Finally, I want to mention that Orin actually has two different death cries. Here's the first one. It plays if Jinzaemon isn't at the watermill. And here's the one that plays if Jinzaemon is at the watermill.
よかった。作座様が代わりにあの子をよこしてくれた。そこにいるのですね。
Anyway, backtracking a bit from Mibu Village to the Hidden Forest, you can find one of the hardest mini-bosses in the game here. I'm just kidding, he's a massive pussy. There's a, decently common running joke that you'll see online that the Mist Noble is one of the hardest bosses of all time, and furthermore has 3 or more phases. Well, we can actually make this a reality. By spamming jump kicks on him in this corner, we'll eventually break his stamina and trigger a death blow. However, when we hit a death blow here, this happens. I'm so fucking scared. This only happens if you trigger an aerial death blow on the mini-boss Tokujiro before fighting the Mist Noble, killing him and then going to fight the Mist Noble without resting or quitting or anything like that for whatever reason. This same thing can also happen with the Corrupted Monk, but this is much harder to intentionally trigger. She'll even start her true form's second phase after the death blow. After killing the Corrupted Monk and the Guardian Ape, you may choose to break the Iron Code to side with Kuro, or obey the Iron Code and side with Owl to pursue the Shura ending. If we choose the latter, you will, of course, fight Emma, as well as Ishin. There's a few things I want to point out about these fights that I think most players probably missed. For one thing, Emma's fighting style closely resembles Ishin's, due to him being the one that trained her. We can make direct links to Ishin with the Ashina Cross, as well as her grab attack closely resembling his. On top of that, some of you may have noticed that while Ishin's cross has more strength behind it than Emma's, hers comes out quicker and is harder to parry than Ishin's. Plus, her swing seems to make a shape much closer to a perfect cross than any other character who uses the move. This could be for a couple of reasons. One is that Ishin's attack focuses more on power, while Emma focuses more on technique, sort of reflecting their personalities. Or, as Ass Giblin on Reddit suggests, it's possible that due to Emma's close relationship to the sculptor, she wanted to perfect the technique, as the skill is so fast it could sever the arm of Shura. After killing Emma, we get a short cutscene, and I'd like to specifically point out the subtle little smile Wolf makes right after it starts. This could be interpreted as him basically completely succumbing to becoming Shura. Or maybe he heard Ishin behind him and is excited for a fight. Anyway, the fight with Ishin starts just after this, though this is very different from the Sword Saint version of the fight. For one thing, he uses fire during the Shura fight, something he doesn't do at all as Sword Saint Ishin. This is likely because during this ending, Wolf is in the process of becoming a Shura, and through that is creating fire. I mean, his skin is literally on fire during the final cutscene. Ishin has, of course, fought and defeated an attempted Shura in the past with the sculptor. That fight is likely when Ishin learned to manipulate Ashura's flame, and that's what we can see him doing here, controlling our flames with his slashes and using it against us. Also, looking closely at his sword during this fight, we can see that it's the same sword he uses while dressed as Tengu. Especially note the Damascus-like patterns on either sword here. During the Sword Saint fight, he uses this sword. His Tengu outfit, usually found in Ishin's room, will also disappear after starting the Shura fight. On top of that, this is pretty well known at this point, but Owl is holding Genishido's head during the cutscene, though the head itself is off screen and only visible using a free cam. There's a little more to it than just that though, I think. The Akko's Spirit Falls item description reads, "Headless are the ruined form of corrupted heroes who once fought for their country." This could imply that this ending actually results in a headless Genishido ghost wandering around somewhere in Ashina. If you chose to break the Iron Code, you'll fight
Owl.
at the top of Ashina Castle, and for some reason, during either of his fights, parrying his shurikens he throws after he kicks you will deal posture damage to him, and it can actually cause his posture to break, strangely. As far as I know, this is the only time parrying projectiles actually does any posture damage. This finishing death blow we do here is actually the same animation that occurs during Lady Butterfly's fight. We literally stab them in the back, just like they did to Wolf. Finally, it's worth noting that the owl spirit he summons has a wounded eye, just like its owner. Just before entering the Fountainhead Palace, you'll come across this palanquin, and entering it will, of course, activate the massive straw doll, and, well, he'll take you to Fountainhead Palace. However, if you look up before entering the palanquin, you can actually see his hand waiting above you. Now that we've entered Fountainhead Palace, we'll come across the corrupted True Monk pretty much immediately. This is pretty well known at this point, but I figure it's still worth mentioning that you can completely skip her second phase by simply grappling to this tree above the fight after the first death blow. She'll lose aggro briefly, and you can get a death from above death blow to immediately enter her third phase. Once we kill her, we'll make our way into the actual meat of Fountainhead Palace and quickly come across these grapple points on top of the buildings in this area. Looking closely will reveal that they're modeled after the old dragons of the tree, the enemies found during the Divine Dragon's fight. Also, we'll come across a headless found underwater here, and this guy actually uses a completely different model from the above water variant. The primary model looks like this. The second is this chud, used whenever the enemy is placed underwater. You can see his body actively decomposing, which likely caused a buildup of gas, and that, of course, led to his body bloating up. The reason they're decomposing is because they reside in divine water. Water inside of the Fountainhead Palace is said to be blessed by the gods, and is used in making divine confetti, allowing attacks to connect with apparitions. Because these headless are surrounded by divine water, they're always affected by it, making divine confetti redundant in these fights. The headless also have a grab attack, where it looks like they're, well, ripping something out of your ass. In some Japanese mythology, it was commonly believed that your soul resided somewhere inside of your intestines, and that, if you weren't careful, a kappa would rip that shit out of you. Well, that's probably what we're seeing here. We can also find a Shichimen warrior here, and if you get behind them before dealing their final death blow, you can actually use the puppeteer ninjutsu on them. This is basically completely useless, as they only ever really appear as the sole enemies in the areas where you find them. The only one actually near some enemies is this one in the Fountainhead Palace, and has a couple of dogs and lizards that can be found near him, but like, what the hell are we doing here? It hardly counts. This is basically worthless. You can actually use the puppeteer ninjutsu on most mini-bosses in the game. As far as I know, the only exceptions are either of the bulls and the headless for some reason. Which strikes me as a little strange considering you can puppeteer the Shichiman warriors, but I digress. After Ashen has been invaded again near the end of the game, you can find a bunch of these exhausted soldiers. Kind of related to the crickets instantly dying that I mentioned earlier, jump kicking these guys will cause them to instantly die. This is because jump kicking actually does a very small, generally irrelevant amount of damage. If we return back to the start of the game through the abandoned dungeon into the Ashnar Reservoir now that the invasion's happened, we can see that it seems somebody in the Interior Ministry has closed the hole that can be found above the cave we were initially imprisoned in. Just before the Demon of Hatred fight, you'll come across this idol surrounded by a bunch of flames and a whole bunch of claw marks as some environmental storytelling just outside of the fight's arena. This is pretty well known, but after starting the fight, the demon is actually missing its left arm, just like the sculptor. The only thing left of his arm is this stump, but he conjured an artificial arm through manipulating fire. Something that's a little less well known though, is what these fireballs actually are. If we zoom in on them, we can see that they're the sculptor's Buddha statues. Speaking of statues, there's actually a bunch of what I'm pretty sure are Buddha statues we can find at the temple grounds in Senpo Temple. Diving underwater here will reveal a bunch of them at the bottom, which could represent how the monks lost their way in pursuit of immortality. Also, using divine abduction on any monk here in the temple will cause this to happen. The only monks this won't work on are these guys with the big hats. In the first phase of the Sword Saint Ishin fight, you may have noticed that Ganeshido deals a little chip damage to you, even with a parry. Well, this is actually completely negated if you use Divine Confetti, as well as the Lilac Umbrella. We can also use Confetti in combination with the Mid-Air Deflect skill to completely negate one of Inner Ishin's most frustrating attacks, the Mortal Draw. Typically, you would parry the first two swipes, get pushed into the outer radius of the attack, and then get hit by that. However, if we simply jump in a direction that isn't directly forward during the first attack, we can just parry the second hit and we won't be knocked back at all. The timing of the parry is a little weird though. Almost every enemy in the game will physically react and be a little stunned when they get Mikiri countered. The only exceptions I know of are Ishin, who starts pulling his sword back before your animation is even over, as well as any of the 7 Ashina Spears, his most loyal samurai, who will similarly calmly react and often smoothly transition into an attack. Anyway, during Ishin's third phase, he'll send out these shockwaves that will knock you back and do some damage if you get hit, but these can actually be deflected, strangely enough. This also works for the True Corrupted Monk's shockwave she emits once she lands, as well as the Demon of Hatreds after it lands at the end of this attack. None of these deal any posture damage or anything though, it's really just for some swag. After you've beaten Sword Saint Ishin, he'll typically submit to you and wait for you to kill him with the Mortal Blade. However, instead of doing that, you can actually use the loaded spear on him to cause this to happen. You can't finish the game in this state, or even leave the arena, so you'll have to restart the fight to continue. There's a couple more unique interactions like that one I would like to mention. For example, you can use the Projected Force skill with a finger whistle to send out a projectile that basically acts like Oral Decoy from Dark Souls. Also, really quick, speaking of the whistle, blowing it plays the same noise used when summoning Torrent in Elden Ring. Though in Elden Ring it's slightly pitched up and faster. You can also use Projected Force with the Umbrella for an interaction that occurs after blocking a certain amount of damage. Normally, the attack looks like this. However, after blocking enough damage, your umbrella will start smoking, and using projected force in this state unleashes a ranged attack. Once it's started smoking again, you can store the umbrella and use it when you choose. I feel like I should mention that you can use the umbrella's block to block a bunch of grabs in the game, like the Chained Ogre. Speaking of grabs, they're pretty much all unparryable, with only a few exceptions that I know of. First is Snake Eyes, though the timing's a little weird. You need to parry as she drags her weapon back. The second one I know of is actually Ganishito's grab. The third one is Emma during the Shura ending, though this only works with an umbrella. You can use the umbrella to deflect the Guardian Ape's jump grab as well, though not his normal grab. Next, you can parry the Ashina Rats' grabs where they jump on you and snap your neck. And finally, you can just block the Headless' grab underwater if you stand in front of them and hold the block button. You'll get a little staggered, but that's all. Oh, also you can parry Owl's grab if you want to count it as one. Anyway, you can use any type of fire prosthetic to burn down any tall grass the player can hide in. Strangely though, you can't burn down the plants found in Ishin's arena. As far as I know, there isn't any use to this, and no enemies ever use this to try and smoke out the player or anything. It's just a neat little detail. Well, I think that's everything. Thank you for watching. And thank you again to War Thunder for sponsoring the video. Play for free on Xbox, PlayStation, PC, or mobile, and use one of my links in the pinned comment or description to receive a massive bonus pack containing premium vehicles, 7 days of premium access, and more for new or returning players that haven't played for 6 months.